Hello, entrepreneurs. Joe DeChara, CPA extraordinaire, coming to you live from downtown Levittown, New York, Long Island, for another sore throat laced How to Win at Business. Amazing episode number 3498. And tonight we have a very, very special guest. They're all special, but this individual is more than special. He's a dear friend of mine. Highly intelligent. So don't let his intelligence scare you. He's really a pussycat. He's a great guy. He drives a Harley. So don't mess with him. And without any further ado, he's going to actually talk to us about jet airplanes, believe it or not. So don't let the conversation go over your head like it does with me. So here he is, the one and only the Wolf Man, Jeffrey Wolfe. How are you, Jeff?
Joe, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Sorry for keeping you hostage in the green room, but
it's all right. It's a great party in there. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Can't believe.
Thank you for the green M&Ms.
Yes. So, Mr. Wolfe, we go back a while now.
Yes, we do. And thank you so much for the great introduction. You had me thinking, wow, I want to meet that guy.
Yeah, that's the idea. Someday maybe you will. So, so you want to give a little background on you, because I won't do you justice.
I had the opportunity to go to engineering school for two reasons. This is how I was seriously planning out my career and my future. And the two criteria were I could get out of high school a semester early if I went to college, and they had an easy entrance exam. Well, there's a third criteria too that's even more important. They had a great placement program. People were hiring the graduates. And that gave me an opportunity to go work for Hughes Aircraft, which was an amazing experience.
Wow.
It was an amazing experience. Learned important leadership principles like if you stay half step ahead, you're a leader. If you're 3 steps ahead, you're a martyr.
Oh, man. Stuff like that, stupid little, things like that. You think about it and you're like, oh my God, now I know what he was talking about.
Yeah, and it was a great experience. That led to opportunities in the aerospace industry to work on manufacturing, worked my way into product development, got to work on aircraft and launch systems before I went into consulting.
Wow.
And I know, I look back on that and just think, oh my gosh.
All the crazy things you must have launched.
Yeah, the truth of it is I had the opportunity to work with amazing people.
Did you get to meet Mr. Hughes?
I did not. That was long after he had passed. I did get to work with people that had spent time around him and had been with the company a long time and had worked, 10, 20 years with him. Way back in the day, those were coming to the end of their career at the time that I hired in. And we got to learn from those types, the people that pushed and they were all about pushing the boundaries of technology.
I didn't know all about him, and I know it's a movie, but I didn't know that he flew planes and stuff. I mean, the guy was off the charts.
So he was the Elon Musk of his generation in many ways, right? Because he disrupted aircraft, he disrupted movie making, right? He disrupted technology, the application of technology in a lot of ways.
Yeah, unbelievable. So now I get a little bit more of a glimpse into where you came from.
It was all about how I appreciate the great intro. It was the power of working with people that were really good at what they did and that were willing to take reasonable risks in pushing the envelope. That really was my huge takeaway from those years in that industry, because we did some amazing things. They did some amazing things. And I got to go along for the ride.
Interesting. So, it's funny to see where you wound up, and now to know, and you've told me that story before, but it's like my father tricked me into becoming a CPA, and I resented him for 25 years. And then I'm like, oh my God, thank you, Dad. Because so you wound up in this, and I don't believe in coincidences. It's all, driven by the universe. And, so we all wind up exactly where we're supposed to wind up. And now you run this, and I keep threatening to join you on one of these. What do you call it again? The
Adventure Summits?
The Adventure Summits, where you take CEOs and you do, interesting things like zip lining and bungee jumping and
How about big game fishing on the ocean?
I saw you out there with John Limbacher, right?
Yes. I mean, imagine being on the ocean in a wonderful, luxurious 55-foot long yacht, totally internet connected. Thank you, Starlink. Catching delicious fish, eating them. I love the Catch and We Eat program. While at the same time being able to have very, very advanced marketing discussions about how to grow your business from a marketing perspective in the current environment from one of the top marketers in the U.S.
You're talking about John.
Yes.
I heard he's one of the best cooks in America also.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps showing those dishes on Facebook, and I keep saying, stop showing off. Or take that yacht over to the Hudson.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Yeah. So what prompted me to invite you here is a specific live that you did on LinkedIn. I don't know. Is that also on Facebook?
Yes, it is. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well.
I've been on LinkedIn a lot lately.
Good place to be. Good place to be. A lot of sharp business people working together there.
Yeah, well, I avoided LinkedIn for years, believe it or not. So anyway, like I said, you wind up back where you're supposed to be. So I'm pretty comfortable there now, making some great connections, putting out a lot of, good information, just like you. And, I do try to visit you when you're doing your lives, because you always have something interesting.
And I appreciate that.
Or you're on one of your adventures, and I'm like, I gotta do that. So we gotta put it on the schedule. I don't know if you have things scheduled how far in advance, but we got to do that. So
we'll put it on the calendar, and we'll figure it out from there.
Okay, we'll put it on the calendar, and then you'll create one of those adventures around my schedule. That was really nice of you, Jeff.
Well, and around what is one of your bucket list adventures?
It's a big bucket. It's a big bucket.
Good, even better. But no spoilers. As you're watching this, sorry, no spoilers. Joe and I are going to talk about that offline, because this is about how to really build your business. Joe's got a great podcast. You really do have a great podcast series, Joe. You help so many people get their, the financials on a business is so important. And that's really not most of our experts. I know I'm not really good with, I'm good with numbers, but the system, the financial, putting it all together aspect of it is a challenge for me.
Tonight's podcast, I think you'll be more comfortable doing it. But and it's all about my team, the people I put around me. And that all started with our friend Larry Broughton. And I know Larry had the suggestion for you to start this adventure thing.
Yes.
So it's come full circle. So Larry showed me, how to hire the right people, and I have an unbelievable team around me. I do very little now. I just look at my calendar, I show up, and they're doing all the behind the scenes stuff, so that I'm blessed. But So getting back, I saw you were on the live, and you were talking about this person that was handcrafting a part on an airplane, because this was the plane manufacturer, right? This was one of your clients, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that you had to handcraft a piece of metal, and it goes on. I'm like, and then I got scared. I was like, what if that person like misaligned it, and now I'm on this airplane? But anyway, I was like, that's interesting. And then you started talking about the whole sequence of events. And what caught me was, because we go through this on a daily basis, believe it or not, putting together our system, our accounting systems. And for every client, believe it or not, even the small businesses, the accounting system is different, because all the entrepreneurs are different. They got different mentalities. I don't have to tell you how they do business. So we have to try to adapt as much as we can to what they're doing, and still keep our system intact. Okay, we still have. It's almost like, and you could, explain to me what exactly we're doing, because we have like this mold, this system, and you can't go outside of the system. If you go out of the system, it doesn't work. But we do have to give them that latitude, okay, to do things the way that they're comfortable. Now, sometimes it means they have to change a lot of things that they're doing, which is not comfortable, that. But overall, we've been successful at it, because we're able to scale, but there's always room for improvement, Jeffrey, right?
Yes, there is.
So what got me was, you said, when you started saying, so they can't start doing this process until a bunch of other processes are done. And then there's a bunch of other things that have to be done after this. And what got me was, you said it took the person like a week. And I said, oh my God, that's you're building an airplane, and this one little widget is holding it up. It's adding another week. And I'm an accountant. I'm like, what is that doing to the cash flow?
Well, and especially, I mean, think about this. So you take an aircraft that costs, well, let's just say $100 million. And that's not an unreasonable figure. The cost is $100 million.
That's because of inflation, right?
To build it. No, this probably more. Yeah, that's not even counting for inflation, right? Then we're really getting in. It gets insane when you add the inflation in. But say it's $100 million in cost to build it, in terms of labor and parts. The crazy thing is, it can take up to 3.5 years to go from raw material to having something that you can fly off of the runway on a test flight. It's not even delivered yet, so you're still not getting paid. That is a lot of money spread out over a long period of time. Once you get all the parts in the building and start building it, you're still talking about, you're still measuring it in terms of months, not days. And the context of the specific example that you were talking about was in building a commercial airliner. Let me step back for a second. When laying out schedules, like from a project management standpoint, there's always certain things that can't be, there's some things that you can do in parallel, right? It's like, well, while we're doing in accounting, while we're doing data entry for accounts receivable, we can have someone else working on general ledger. No, that's probably not right. I'm going to get myself in trouble here.
I get it. We're having somebody enter all the data to set up the tax as soon as we get a client.
So you've got you can have multiple people doing different parts of it, but there's some things that have to go in sequence.
Yeah, well,
and that's what creates your minimum time that you can do something. Like, for example, you can't run analytical reports until all the data is correctly entered into the accounting system.
Right.
So one has to follow the other.
So you see what the parallel is right now.
Mm-hmm. And we had the same thing on building an aircraft. There's a bunch of things that can be done in parallel, right? You can build the land. You can do the final assembly on landing gear. You can build the center of the aircraft, the passenger cabin, and you can do the wings separate at the same time. And then when they're all ready, you bring them together. Well, this particular example was something that, because of what it required, had to be done in sequence. There was nothing else. It couldn't be done in parallel with anything else. So it was one of those tasks that determined the minimum amount of time that it took us in a perfect world to build the aircraft. And because of the order that we assembled something, I'm trying to think of a good real world analogy. It's like baking a cake. Baking is difficult because things have to be done in a certain sequence. And if they aren't, it doesn't taste right or it won't rise. So it just doesn't come out right when
just had that experience. I put too much baking soda and salt, and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't want to throw it out, so I ate it. But no, you're right. I get it. But when you're building a plane, you got people's lives in your hand. You don't want to see a plane go up and then,
Yes. And if we have time, I have a side story about that, about safety. Something that was one of those very weird, wow, what a small blue marble we live on types of stories.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that if we have time.
Okay.
For this story though, when building something, whenever you assemble something, every part, when you manufacture a part, there's a little bit of variation in each part. That's why we have engineering specifications. It says, as long as it's within this range, it's good. It'll work. It's safe. We're good to go. What we learned in the 1990s was, you know what? And this was when we're really being able to start applying high-end computer tools to do the mathematical analysis. We found out sometimes that doesn't necessarily work out. And the order in which you assemble those determines where that variation goes, right? So if you've got something that's an inch and a quarter, but it's actually another thousandth of an inch longer, but the engineering specification is that's okay, and you put another thing that's actually a thousandth of an inch longer, right? By the time you put 10 of those together, you're starting to get some noticeable extra length.
There's a ripple effect.
There's a ripple effect. Well, this was a case where because of the assembly sequence, we had a ripple effect that created a gap that would be of a different size in where two assemblies came together. So we had to have someone handcraft a shim to fill that gap.
Interesting.
And this had all been tested and certified, so there was no safety concern in terms of what was being done. And this was on an aircraft that had been flying for years before we looked into this particular. We were looking for ways that we can go faster and be more cost effective without doing something stupid, right? Because you're right. When you're flying an aircraft, there is a lot of safety considerations. You have people's lives in your hands. You have to be very careful about that. And the FAA and the airlines pay very close attention to that. They're very picky. So we had a sequence that we knew worked. It's just, if we could, it took a person a week to get that shim handcrafted. They're working with really tough, you hear the phrase aircraft quality aluminum. So you have somebody taking this hardened aluminum and it'd start with a blank plug of it, and they'd have to handcraft it and hand shape it to fit that gap.
Explain what handcrafted is, because I hear a handcrafted beer, handcrafted vodka. I'm like, what is that? I have this picture somebody like with clay and.
Well, in this case, it was a very highly skilled mechanic. It was specifically a woman that had been working on building aircraft for a couple of decades. She was great at what she did, one of the best, which was why she was the one that built these shims. And in this case, handcraft meant you've got somebody hunched over on the production line with a file, a Dremel tool, something that looks like a Dremel tool that you would use to carve wood.
Yeah.
and is shaving away metal to
Wow.
custom fit that shim in
Isn't
that
that
gap between those two
wouldn't that
parts.
be boring for somebody like that with that kind of experience?
You would think. It
Yeah.
took her a week to handcraft it and get the fit just right, and to get it, because they had a whole bunch of people that had to double check that and sign off on it.
And now
And
she's
this is on
got
every aircraft.
wow. So then she's
And
got a whole line of people waiting for her to finish this. Oh my
if it takes her another day, then it is another day that we
What if
can't
she
deliver that
calls in
aircraft,
sick?
because it's what's called a critical path task.
What if
It
she calls
paces
in
everything
sick?
else. And what makes it even scarier, the next best person at doing that task took 30 days to
Oh my
complete the
God.
task.
So she was in a position like Eldana said, she was in a good position to negotiate.
Yes, she's in a good position to negotiate, but what if she wants to go on vacation?
I
Right.
said, what if she gets sick, goes on vacation? Oh, that's not a. And
Retires, now the customer's got to wait another month to get what we promised them.
so what amazes me is, so you're talking about $100 million airplane. So this must be a huge company.
Yes.
I'm thinking it must be a public company, right?
Yes.
Okay. And there's one
Well,
person.
it was now for transparency, it's a company that no longer exists and no longer manufactures aircraft, which is why I'm comfortable talking about it. And it's not meant as a snipe at them. It was just in that era, this was how things were done.
Yeah, and I'm not you don't have to say who they, you might they might have to kill you if you say who they are, but I'm not even. But the fact is, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, probably thousands of employees, and this one part of it is like, I would call that a weak link. I
Right.
would be looking at that and saying, listen, we got a potentially huge problem here. It's the same thing in accounting. That's why we have a line, we have a sequence. And what
Yeah.
we're finding is, if one part of it, and this is we're talking about, a lot of times hundreds of dollars, not hundreds of millions, but it upsets the whole system. And there's a ripple effect. It's like, okay, if this is delayed, that eventually it screws up the whole business. We have a nice business model, so we're always looking for ways to tweak it. So I'm hoping that you're going to give us the magic bullet.
It's going to be more like an arrow in the heart.
Okay.
And here's why. Because let's make this a little bit more general for a second to businesses.
Okay.
Right? Because think about working capital and the cost of keeping the doors open for a day in a business. Right? You need to have enough cash in the bank in order to pay for a day if no money came in that day.
Right. So
right?
that, just so people know, what that means is, if there's no money, no revenue, it's still costing you money for rent, insurance. You still got to keep the heat and the air conditioning on.
Mm-hmm.
There's still that's the overhead cost. It's costing you money no matter what you got. Yeah. So
you're paying somebody to answer the phones. So what is the cost of operations for a day? Now, in this case, this specific case with aircraft, without getting into specific numbers, consider this. The cost of operations was 22,000 people showing up on that campus every day, over 2 million square feet of office and manufacturing space, plus the electricity, plus the equipment, plus, you start stacking on those different things. How much money have you borrowed in order to cover the cost of that $100 million expense before you get to invoice the customer, which is different from actually getting paid by the customer, as entrepreneurs know, right? So you look at this and go, you're spreading all this money out over years, and now you've got to pay for 7 manufacturing days that at a minimum includes paying for, and all of the space was leased, So it is paying for the leasing of over 2 million square feet and paying for 22,000 people showing up to work every day on payroll.
I can't even imagine what it costs
Plus,
to park
right?
all those cars.
Now, in fairness, there's some overlap. You know, not all 22,000 are working on that aircraft. So let's scale that down a little bit. The team that it takes to build an aircraft is still numbered in the thousands. So you still have several thousand people are necessary to build that aircraft that you're paying for each of those 7 days. And you cannot, you know, so that's 7 days longer until you can invoice and then ultimately collect money for this $100 million investment you've made.
So let's bring this down to perspective for regular people, because not many people are building $100 million aircraft.
Yes.
But what I got was, I said, this affects everybody's business. Everybody's and maybe even to a larger extent, because we deal with a lot of solopreneurs. And unfortunately, Jeff, a lot of them don't even put a value on their time.
No.
I've had
that's heartbreaking too.
Yeah, I've had people say, "Oh, I would ask them, how much are you paying for your bookkeeping?" And it would be nothing. It's like, well, how is that? They were like, well, because I do it. Like, well, so that means your time is not worth anything. So no matter how small the business, there's always a sequence.
Yes.
There's always a sequence. And if you're not paying attention to that, from the time you wake up in the morning till you go to sleep at night, if you're not in control of that sequence, then you're not in control. You're leaving everything up to chance. So I just wanted to make that point. It's important.
Yes, no, that is an excellent point, because going back to the aircraft example, all we needed to do was change the order of sequence that we were assembling. We weren't manufacturing anything except for the shim at that point. It was assembly. We needed to change the sequence in which we assembled the parts in order to eliminate the need for that particular part to be handmade, which saved us a week in the cost of building the week's worth of expenses. So a manufacturing day is millions of dollars in operating costs.
Wow.
So that would save us millions times 7, and eliminate the risk of adding another 3 weeks of manufacturing cost, because that was the best that could be done, other than having that specific person do it.
Yeah,
so not only was that 7 days of expense, it was dependent on one individual.
It was the risk. That's what you like. What happens if she wants to go on vacation? That's going to set us back another 2 weeks.
Or geez, imagine this. Heaven forbid, but all of a sudden she's in the hospital for 6 weeks with COVID.
Oh my God. Or what if she wants to retire?
Yeah. Or what if she wants to retire? Now all of a sudden you've got, call it $1 million a day times 15. Plus there's still a fixed expense for weekends and we often don't account for that. But there's money leaking on the weekends. There's stuff that is costing us when we don't think it is, because we don't see it, or it's not immediately invoicing. You know, the electric company doesn't invoice us for Saturday and Sunday, but we get the bill for the month.
Yeah. So explain. So now it seems too simple a solution, to be honest with you. So you're telling me, so you put the parts together, and I'm thinking about when I built model airplanes, you had to do them in order. So you're telling me that all you had to do was switch around the order?
Because by changing the order, instead of we're talking about that ripple effect of variation as we stack one onto the other. What it did, instead of having variation leave us with that gap, we distributed the variation somewhere else that didn't cause us that problem.
Okay. I don't know exactly how that happened, but how did you come up with that?
We were doing a very advanced computer analysis, and then we went to the manufacturing line and did some measurements and go, yes, we validated in reality. I love computer models, but they are just models. You always have to validate with actual data, right? You spend marketing dollars, you have to validate sales with data that result from those marketing dollars, right? When running a company, you have to know your financials because that's your validation, real world validation that what you're doing is providing value that someone's willing to pay you money for, and that they're paying you enough money that it covers your expenses plus some profit.
So let me,
So
I get that. So I don't know if it's the same. Maybe you could tell me. I'm teaching people now in other countries how to do U.S. taxes because there's a big need for it. So we have actually we have a long 13-week program, and then we have a shorter where we're just showing them the computer program and how to pop out tax returns, which really it's data entry. They're given a set of facts, and I'm like, this isn't real. You're given the facts and you're just putting them in the computer. In the 13-week course, I don't let them use a computer. What I tell them,
that's harsh.
So
oh my gosh,
because that's how I learned. So they have to
but good for you. Now I'm teasing you some, but good for you. And here's why I say that. You learn so much more by getting into the guts of it, of having to do it by hand as it was done for thousands of years before we had computers.
So this is why I do it. And I was saying this because you brought up the whole computer model. We have generations of people that learn how to do accounting on the computer. They are coming out with garbage, Jeff. I'm looking at other people's work. I'm like, they should be embarrassed to even call themselves accountants. I'm like, this isn't accounting. What they've become are data entry clerks. So what I taught them by doing it by hand, they were forced to look at the form, look at the line number, look at the instructions. Okay. And then at the end of the 13 weeks, I said, okay, now I'm going to show you the program. And it was like, oh my God, this is nothing like. So now they knew when they enter something in the computer, they could look at the finished product and say, there's something wrong here.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes. And here's, because we're talking about variation in manufacturing, let me bring that to one of my favorite business questions. I love to ask business owners, what's your median AR, days aging, or whatever their measures? Usually ask for days. And too often they have no idea what I'm talking about.
I was going to say, they don't even know what that means.
They don't. And I figure, okay, we have some very basic problems if you don't know what your accounts receivable is doing. If they do, they usually give me a number that's worthless because they give the average instead of the median. Now, I learned statistics and statistics analysis by doing it by hand. And I even taught when I was at Hughes Aircraft, I taught that their systems engineers were the best in the world at that time. And I was honored by doing my first training that I ever did was doing statistical analysis for their systems engineers. And I put them through what I had learned, 2 days of learning how to do this stuff by hand, no calculators allowed or anything. I'm still looking them up and apologizing. I've almost gotten to every one of them.
Oh my God, I'm saying no calculator. That's
it's like, it was grueling. 2 years later, we were able to do the same thing in 4 hours instead of 2 days because we got better in what we were teaching. And so that's a form of variation. But coming back to accounts receivable, variation, especially right now in high inflation or recession times, a variation in accounts receivable will eat a company's profits and maybe even bankrupt them by screwing up their cash flow, right? General Motors went bankrupt on $130 billion in cash flow.
Where did I hear this?
This was during the 2008-2009 global financial.
I read it in one of these books. You would think, oh, a company doing that much business, how could they go bankrupt?
Because they didn't pay attention to the cash flow. They were looking at the numbers. They had 130 billion in sales. They choked on their cash flow and went bankrupt, and the U.S. government had to bail them out. The same thing in a business. What happens? let me use a real example. A client that I worked with, small, family-owned manufacturing company, 4 generations. They've been around since the 1920s. They're the leader in their market at what they do. Their accounts receivable average, which is the wrong measure, and here's why. Their accounts receivable average was like 32 days. And with manufacturing and the way they were working with clients or their clients, that was okay. It was somewhere, give or take, about 30 days. That was the average. When we dug into their data, we found out that a quarter of their accounts receivable was 90 days plus.
Oh my God.
Because they had a whole bunch of people that paid in a very narrow window of time early on, because they did a net 20.
So it makes the
skewed
average
skewed the number and made the average look lower than it is. AR, always the best question to ask with accounts receivable is, what's the median? Where's that 50% point, right? Half greater, half less.
So
and they even had a couple of they had 3 big accounts that were out to 180 days.
Wow. That, you see, that'll bankrupt the company. That'll make
and with high inflation, so say it's 12% inflation. And producer wholesale pricing, it's been close to that for several months now. Using 12%, just to make the math easy for discussion, at 12%, you're losing 1% per month on every one of those dollars you're not collecting. So if it goes out 120 days, now they've lost 6%. No, I don't have my calculator. I'm living dangerously. 180 days. When they're getting out to 180 days, they've lost 6% of the value on each one of those dollars that they're collecting. So they've lost 6% in sales.
They've lost a lot more. We can go into it. The resource.
Yes, right. At a minminimum. But
listen, it's hard enough to get a sale, and then to make a sale and then not get paid. That's devastating.
Yeah.
But also,
in manufacturing and industrial arena, it's a little more common to have that take longer. If you're doing business with the government, good luck getting paid in less than 90 days. But you build that into hopefully, if they're working with someone like you who is a consummate professional, they are keeping track of that and planning for it. But that comes back to, how are you paying for day-to-day operations? Well, and at what point do those kind of delays or those types of leakage of profit because of inflation and other forces, where does that start to become a problem?
So I'll tell you, and bringing it back to the small business, because people listen to this stuff. I'll give you another example about not knowing your numbers. I'll give you an opposite. Apple Computer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when they were going to go bankrupt, they knew. They said, we're going to run out of cash in 3 months. Now they're doing billions of dollars in business. They got thousands of employees, and I would say they must have a good freaking accountant. How do they know in 3 months they're going to run out of money? And think about this. If they didn't know that, there would be no Apple Computer right now.
Yeah.
Right? So, you showed the one extreme, and I'm like, how does a company that big, because they lose sight, they take their eye off the ball. I'm sure you must have read, there's 2 books, Built to Last, and
yep.
Okay.
So and Good to Great.
Right. And they used the 2 comparison companies. And, one company was like, they got all the executives got corner offices. And meanwhile, the company that was Built to Last, they had rickety old chairs in the conference room, because they were like, that's not important. Our business is more important. And the other company was buying planes, and they're just bleeding money. And they were like, oh, we're making so much money. That's not the case. Yeah. But bringing it down, so people might say, yeah, but those are huge companies. It's the same thing with our company, Jeff. You know that. I'm like, I have a client. He's in the pool business. Okay. He helps manufacture pools, luxury pools. So he's got to, get the job. He's got to hire all the contractors. He's got to pay all the money out. And he's not keeping track of his accounts receivable. and the guy never has cash. You know, he's
Hmm.
got to scrape to pay me every month. And I'm like, because he's stuck. He's
Yeah.
stuck. He's not listening to people like us. So guess what happened? He decided to go back to work. He found somebody, a bigger pool manufacturer. He's like, listen, I'm good at what I do, but I'm not good at running this business. So he's back to being an employee, getting a W-2. And I said, that's good, Dave. That's good. Better for your family. Now you'll sleep at night. Some people aren't cut out for it. You know that.
Yes. And the thing is, he could have brought in a professional manager to run the business.
He could have. There's a lot of things he could have done.
But everybody's not cut out for that either.
But
that's hard to do. That's really.
It is hard.
I all transparency, two things real quick. I have a hard time doing that. I've caught myself so many times doing stuff where going, you know what? I should be working with a professional on doing this. And for whatever reason or another, it's like, the ego shot of, no, I'll figure it out. Or the fear of going, yeah, but that opens up the door too much into what I'm doing, and they'll just take the idea and run and leave me hanging. And
I got it.
You know what? I was at an event at Caltech, and they had a panel discussion with some hotshot young tech entrepreneurs that had really made, big money, like 40 million, $1 billion before the 30 kind of things. And one of those tech entrepreneurs responded to a question about, what from someone who was worried about, if my idea, what if someone takes my idea and just runs with it instead of working with me the way I wanted to? And he just looked at me and goes, look, if your idea is so easy to copy that someone's going to do that, and you believe in it so little, and it is such a paltry idea that it can be knocked off that easy, he goes, just go home and forget about it. Don't even do it. Go get a job. And the whole room's like going, whoa.
That happened.
And I'm sitting there listening to him and going, you know what? I'm guilty of that at times. It's like, yeah, how big is my idea? How much do I believe in it? How good am I at it? Because if I am, it's like, you know what? It's a big market. Absolutely. So what if someone creates some competition? Shame on me for not being able to step up. And defend what I'm doing.
I have an attorney on my team, and she's like, you got to sign a not compete agreement. What if we hire them? They see it's like, that would be a big compliment. If somebody came in and copied what we're doing, I'm like, that proves that we got a great system, and now they'll be able to help even more people. So I'm like, don't worry about them stealing this. I'm not worried. There's more than enough business out there for plenty of accountants.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I wanted to admit being guilty of is when you were talking about, prioritize of what we should focus on, where should we be investing and whatnot. It's like, we had a great marketing tool that we worked with for years. I held on to it. It was expensive as all get out. It was easy to work with. I really liked it. The founder sold the company, and the new company, we just never built a working relationship. Never got that working, which then became a problem because the support, we're having challenges with support and learning new things and features. And I was looking at it going, we didn't use 2/3 of the capability, but I held on to that for at least 2 years longer than I should have, and ate the expense of that, along with the opportunity cost of not getting stuff done that we needed to get done, because it was harder to learn and work through challenges, which always comes up with any tool. And then I was introduced to another tool by a mutual colleague of ours that was like, it saved us 60% of the cost. It worked better, plus has a great community of support, which is what I really needed. So it made it easier to go, look, this is not something that should be on my plate or done in-house. So we'll hand it off to one of the experts that works with that tool, or at least to be able to reach out and go, hey, I'm having this challenge. Anybody got some recommendations on how to work through it?
The support is huge.
It's like, yeah, that's a micro version of some of the problems that General Motors and some of these big companies run into when they're working with big numbers.
Yeah, I could see that. So Listen, we've been going on for over 40 minutes. I usually try to keep these to 20.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't say. I
Too many
want to keep
stories.
going. We made the points that I wanted to make. You did a great job. We took building $100 million airplane and applied it to our little accounting practice because it's really all the same. It's just the numbers have more zeros behind them.
Could I add one more quick story to that?
No.
Okay.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Joe. It's great being here. No, it's just this is just 60 seconds.
Okay.
Had an opportunity to talk to the then CEO of CalFed Bank, which has since been bought up by another, it was a regional bank here in California. He made anybody that had a management title within the company, every 5 years they would require that they map out every step that they were responsible for in their organization, for operations, everything they did step by step, and then they had to justify why each one of those was necessary. And that gave them an opportunity to look at, are we getting things out of sequence? Because sometimes they'd find, we experimented with something and then never switched back when we found out it didn't work that well. Or we switched something because there was an exception that needed to be handled. And all of a sudden that became standard operating procedure. And he said, that's the only way that we could keep things in the correct sequence, keep misalignments from happening between people with complementary responsibilities. Or, it's like when I hand off to you, making sure I've got all my paperwork in order when I'm handing it off to you to be able to do what you do so well. And to also keep, bloat from growing in as the company grew.
Yeah. And I think that's what I don't have big company experience, but I could see how that it will ripple through, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's like all of a sudden they wake up and they say, how did this get out of control so quickly? And you're like, what do you mean? This happened over 30 years. But
Yeah.
they did it every 5 years. Is that what you said?
Every 5 years. And it
Yeah,
usually resulted in, things being reduced, people being moved around.
So we do a similar thing, and that came from Larry, one of his exercises. It's called, I think, Do What You Love to Do. And it's just listing all of your tasks. And I have my people do it like every 3 to 6 months. We haven't done it in about 3 or 4 months now. But every time we do, you wouldn't believe what we've learned from there. I learned that my social media person didn't like doing social media.
Oh.
It was like, oh my God. So we wound up hiring somebody. She had too many things on her plate. Social media was one of them because we had nobody else. We were like, Janine, can you do social media? And she was like, yeah, sure. Well, she was great at it, but she really didn't love it. But then what happens is you look at it and you're like, why am I doing this? I shouldn't be, doing this. Why am I downloading, anyway? So yeah, 5 years sounds like a long time. I assume that people do that all the time in bigger companies. So yeah, that's why, business is complicated, even the smallest business, that. So some of these, and what I try to teach people is, whether you're big or small, it doesn't matter. The principles still apply to you.
Yeah.
Right. So this has been great, Jeffrey. We could talk, for a long time. Okay.
And we did. And I apologize for running over so late. I appreciate your time and the opportunity to be on your show.
I have a 9 o'clock meeting with some of my students, but if you could hang out for a couple of minutes, what I'd like you to, give us some departing words of wisdom. And if you're doing anything now, how do people get in touch with you? How do they connect with you? So go on.
They can get in touch at info@adventureceo.com. That's info@adventureceo.com. Reference Joe and you'll get expedited responses because Joe has been phenomenal to work with and is also a good friend. Just as a parting thought, watch Variation especially, because of the high inflation and recession that we're looking at now, variation will eat your profits in ways that are hard to understand until it's too late if you're not paying attention to it. Work with someone like Joe that knows what they're doing so they can show you what numbers you need to be watching for and how to deal with variation in those numbers, and map out what you're doing. Have the sequence, have a process flow map step by step so you can see, are you doing things in the right order? Is there a better order to do them? What can be done in parallel to help save costs, serve your customer better, and always ask that question. If we're making a change, does this help provide more value in the customer's eyes?
That is great. That is excellent advice. It works if you use it. So definitely apply it to what you're doing. Everything has a sequence. Okay, you just might not be doing them in the right sequence. Okay, for instance, I take my garbage out when I'm already going out. I don't just make a special trip, right? I'm like,
Yep.
I save time, and it might sound crazy, but I'm like, you do that enough times, you're going to save a lot of time. I'm saving a couple of minutes by not. I'm like, if I just take the garbage out when I'm already going out, I'm not wasting any time. I do that with hundreds of things. So anyway, that's our story.
But that's a good analogy, because as you're watching this as a business owner, think about this. Where in your business are you repeatedly pulling your car out of the garage, stopping, going, oh, I forgot the garbage, getting out of the car, walking back into the house, taking the garbage out, taking the can back to where it needs to be stowed, then getting back in the car so you can drive off and do what you need to do?
And it's just habits, Jeffrey, right? It's just, I got in the habit of not, I was like, why am I making a special trip? The garbage isn't that, I mean, it's important, but not so important I need to make a special trip for it. So anyway, thank you, Jeffrey Wolfe. And that's info at, what was that again?
info@adventureceo.com. No spaces, all one word. info@adventureceo.com.
AdventureCEO.com. All right. Thank you, folks. That's our story. We're sticking with it. Stay tuned for some more amazing episodes. We will have Mr. Wolfe back again. It's been so much fun. So over and out. God bless. And